Companeros, welcome to the SQL Data Partners podcast, the podcast dedicated to SQL Server-related topics, which is designed to help you become familiar with what's out there, how you might use those features, or ideas on how you might apply them in your environments. I am Carlos L. Chacon.
And I am Steve Stedman. We are two data professionals trying to help others get a better handle on their database environments, either through this podcast, our training, or our consulting practice. Thanks for joining us on the SQL Trail. Welcome to the show.
SQL Data Partners.
Companeros, welcome to episode 115. It's good to have you on the SQL Trail today.
Yes, it is, and it's good to see
To have you on the SQL Trail today.
Yes, it is, and it's good to see you, Carlos.
Yes. And it will be actually good to see you in the next couple of weeks here. We get out to Summit. We don't get to see each other as often as maybe we'd like.
Oh, is this where we let out that we're not actually in a recording studio?
Yeah. Oh, boy. Was that a secret we were keeping there?
Yes.
Yes, in the MGM studios, or the...
Right.
On Park Avenue or, whatever it is, right? The NBC studios. We were.
Yeah, so we'll actually be seeing each other in a couple weeks.
That's right.
As well as many of our companeros who may be attending past Summit as well.
Yes, that's right. And we do have an event that will make a little bit more sense, which we'll talk about at the end of this episode. So today's episode, we actually want to do a Companero conference retrospective. Of our podcast retrospective, we've been kind of evolving this idea of the conference right in front of our podcast audience, and we went ahead and had the conference this October. And so we want to talk a little bit about it, how it went, maybe some of the lessons we learned from it, the challenges that we had, and then what, if any, future it might have.
Yes, but before we do that, do we have any Companero shout-outs this week?
We do. I want to give a shout-out to Kira, and you'll forgive me if I don't have her last name, but the organizer of the girlsandData.org site. She had put this together, which I thought was interesting in a way, because there's like Girls Who Code and Code.org and lots of information about coding and teaching kids to how to code. And she felt there were lots of opportunities in technology, particularly in data, that you don't need to be a coder. You don't need code. She connected with Mindy Kernut out of Dallas. And Mindy's kind of taken the ball and run with this. And they were kind of just in the Milwaukee area, kind of doing things locally. And Mindy has connected with them, and they've done events now in Dallas and in Charlotte this last weekend. And I went down there for the SQL Saturday, actually expressly for the purpose of putting my girls. I had two of my girls attend the event, and they had a great time. I thought it was phenomenal what they did. Now my girls are not, they're kind of at that age where they're resisting anything that dad tries to get them to do. So there's a bit of that, right, going on. They have that to overcome. And so, my oldest daughters, and so I should say Andy Leonard's daughter, if you want to hear really great things, you should go hear Andy Leonard's daughter. She was absolutely over the moon with it. My daughter's response was, well, it didn't bore me to death. And it may not sound very good, but from some of the languages she's been using lately, that was pretty much as good as it gets. So
Okay, and what age is she at?
So she's actually 15.
Okay.
The girlsandData.org is actually directed more at middle school girls, so the 6th to 8th grade girls. She's a bit older than that, but I thought, you know what? I'm just going to put her in there regardless. I don't think it'll be, be that bad. My other daughter is 13. She's an 8th grader currently. And again, I think she enjoyed it, but some of that feedback was hard to get because, again, she couldn't say... She wasn't super negative about it, but I think she couldn't be super positive about it because she's for fear that I'd sign her up for something else. So.
Interesting. Yeah, what I think is really, really cool about that program is that, there's so many different programs out there to try and introduce younger people to programming.
Right.
But like you said, data can be very different than programming. And you can get on programming. And I think that in the school system, as well as like community college and university, even further up at that level, the education on data is usually pretty weak compared to the education you get on programming.
Right. No, exactly. And so I think it was an interesting program that she put together, focused on that. They're using Tableau as the reporting source, and they have several, pieces of information that they put together, and do different things there. And so I thought it was very interesting. They had an interesting mix of people. So in that class, there were, 15 or 17 girls, probably only half of whose parents were attending the SQL Saturday. They had actually made the announcement to several of the middle schools, and they had middle school girls come. So other folks who weren't directly tied to SQL Server were still attending that. So I thought that was good.
And our next Companero shout out is
West Coast reaching out.
Eduardo Cervantes.
Yes, Eduardo on the West Coast reaching out to us and reminding us that some of our listeners are developers, right? So he mentioned, hey, I do mostly development, but I appreciated the podcast and connecting him with, new features and things. And so thanks, Eduardo, for reaching out. And for also just responding to something on Messenger. And so I don't mean, I'm sure none of our compañeros are doing it, but I have people reach out to me from time to time. They want to connect on LinkedIn. I make it a personal habit to respond. Now, granted, it's pretty generic, but it's, hey, thanks for connecting. I hope you're well. Let's chat. Like, what do you need help with? Right. And it kind of bothers me to no end when I just don't receive a reply, or, even if it's just a, hey, thanks, or, I mean, something, right? Like, let me know that you're there. You have a pulse.
Yep.
Anyway, I don't use is on file.
Yeah. So what's up with this import flat file wizard you mentioned?
Yeah. So one of the new features they've put in, and it's really just, I don't know. I don't want to say dumbing down, but they've had the data import option, so kind of using it, through in the background, almost an SSIS like package that can import data. So what they've done is they've kind of slimmed that down a little bit and made that specific to flat file data, so CSV and text file data. And what it helps people do is to walk through the wizard, because before on the import data, you had to go in and kind of like, I can't remember exactly what the button was, but to see the conversion, what the columns were going to be, you don't have to drill down into that anymore.
Oh, great.
So it will do those conversions. So first you get a preview of the data actually. So again, very similar to, again, features that are in SSIS, but it's going to import lined up. The next screen is, hey, I need to change the column types based on what the wizard is telling you it thinks it should be. And then you can import. And so, yeah, I think just a little bit easier and make it a little bit faster, right? To do those little one-offs, right? Because it seems like we're always, importing just random Excel data for whatever reason, lookup data, things like that.
Oh, yeah. And there's so many different ways of doing it, I think. And that's just one of them that makes it easier. So that's great. All right. So another SQL Server news item we have is on service packs. And this came out a couple weeks ago with SQL Server 2017. Around that time, they also announced that they're going to change the way that service packs work. And instead of doing service packs, they're just going to go straight to cumulative updates. And for the first year, it sounds like the plan is on SQL Server going forward, they're not going to have a service pack. They're actually going to have a cumulative update every month. So you'll get those that cumulative, like the equivalent of what would normally be SP1 in the past. Gotcha. And I think that, there's some interesting takes around that because one, it sounds like we're going to, and this has actually happened for the last couple of years now, is that cumulative updates have been as robust as service packs. It didn't used to be that way years ago. Right. But I think it gets away from service packs having sort of people wait, I'll wait for SP1 or I'll wait for SP2 before I upgrade to that version. Now, you're not going to, there will be no SP. So maybe people will say, I'll wait till CU1 or CU2, but who knows?
Yeah, we'll see. It is interesting. I feel like this is kind of the DevOps coming, maybe not to the database perspective, but that DevOps mentality, right? Making its way into applications. Obviously it's kind of everywhere. People are talking about it. And now it's just making itself involved or connecting with what we do. It's interesting to see itself making itself involved or connecting with what we do on a regular basis.
Yep.
And so I think this will, more applications like this will kind of go this route.
Yep. And I think it really highlights the importance of the software assurance.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we talked about that before we started recording. And I think, with these rapid updates and, again, people are already talking about SQL Server 2018, it is interesting to see what will happen. I feel like, again, kind of with the Azure, mentality of everything being in the cloud and them releasing software so quickly that you're going to almost have to have software assurance just because, how do you know when to upgrade anymore? Just pick a year. And
right.
Unless there's some feature that you're really, really interested in, kind of those rolling updates. It'll be interesting to see what happens. But enterprises do see a lot more version server every year through 2020, right? What do you do there, right? Like that role, it used to be like upgrades were like a big deal, right? Like you'd plan time and it was like, every couple of years. Now I think we're going to see a lot more versions out there than we ever have before.
Right. Yes. Which I think has some pros and has some cons. I think for the people who stay up to date, you're going to have more work to keep up to date there.
Right.
And then I think for the people who don't keep up to date, well, you're going to get outdated, I think, much quicker.
Much quickly. Yeah, that's right. So the gap is going to get, a bit harder. But to their defense, right, Microsoft has been very good about the backwards compatibility. And I think that's even getting better.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So,
and I think hopefully with the more frequent versions, it will make it easier for people to jump to the next version because you don't have 5 years of changes or even 2 years of changes that you have to worry about compatibility with. You're dealing with once a year.
Exactly. Yep.
You're dealing with once a year.
Exactly. Yep.
All right.
So some interesting stuff. Okay. So our show notes for today's episode will be at SQLDataPartners.com/conference.
Or at SQLDataPartners.com/115 for the episode number.
So ultimately what we wanted to do today was talk a little bit about, and I guess have that retrospective for the conference that we put together. And I feel like we should start with the premise of why we wanted to put this together. And admittedly, right, I was heavily influenced by some of the, by my own experience, right? So getting involved with SQL Saturday, with the user group, going to SQL Cruise, going to Summit. So 2013 was the first year I'd gone to Summit, and just had different experiences than with other conferences outside of the community events.
Yep.
And I felt like their perspective, and this kind of goes back to Alan White, right? So this is all Alan White's fault. With that idea that that we all have something that we can share with each other. And, those traditional conferences, in my mind, they do a great job of expelling information, but it's from a collaboration perspective and from a okay, how does this apply to my own unique perspective?
Right.
Or they don't do a great job, I didn't feel like. And so I wanted a way that people could come together, could talk with each other, connect, build those relationships that they could take home with them, things like that.
Yep, and that's the key, the connecting and the relationships. I mean, we've stressed that as one of the most important factors in the conference from day one. Right.
Which it turns out is a little bit of a tough sell to a wider audience. I think as technology people, they like being behind the screen and just consuming information. And so I think it takes a little bit of it's a challenge. It's a bit of a challenge, right? To reach out and say, hey, my name is Carlos, and want to connect. Yep. And that's something that we're trying to work through. And one of the other things that I thought, so again, I'll reference SQL Cruise, which is now Tech Outbound. I think one of the challenges they had was just being on a cruise itself. A lot of people that I'm talking to, I would talk about it, and then I'd say, well, it's on a cruise, and they'd be like, nope.
Oh yeah, I remember hearing that on many occasions at where I wanted to go and pitch it with the company I worked for at that point in time, and they're like, "What? You want us to pay for a cruise?"
Right, exactly, right. Yeah. So I think there's a bit of a challenge there, but some of the concepts were really, really good. Give back to give really good. One of the things that I didn't, or that I missed, or I lacked about the SQL Cruise experience was that ability that to again to kind of give back, to give my own ideas or thoughts around some of the topics. And so the rise of the unconference has played into this idea, and I actually really like this, the premise of this, this idea of, okay, let's, we'll come up with the tracks, or here are the things that we can talk about, but then you know what, we're actually going to decide what we do talk about when we get there, and then plan accordingly. And so that idea resonated really, really strongly with me, and so that was kind of what we wanted to put together.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, and I think that, we went in that direction, and I think that really is what we ended up putting together.
Yeah, so I guess maybe let's jump to those outcomes. I feel like we were able to meet our objectives. We'll talk about the challenges. So what we ended up having is we had 8 attendees. We had 5 speakers, myself and my wife. Right, so there was 15 of us in total. And there was some concern about the size, and we we kind of had this tug of war as to whether we were or weren't going to have it, and then really it came down to the speakers. I reached out to to Kevin, Jonathan, Randolph, and Tracy, and I said, "Look, guys, this is where we are. Do you still want to do this thing?" And They said yes, and I'm like, okay. Let's do it.
Well, and that's one of those where I think, too, speaking of reaching out to the speakers, I was originally on the list as one of the speakers there.
Right.
Break even on it. Doing that, I'd planned on attending, but then when we got to the point where we're sort of making the go, no-go on whether we're going to proceed with the conference or not, it came down to just the overall amount of workload we had combined with the cost in getting there.
Right.
Coast-to-coast flight. And that's when we realized that, we don't have enough people showing up to be able to break even on it. So
that's right.
That's when I decided to opt out at that point, and hopefully next time we can be in a position that it makes sense for me to be there.
Yeah, so that did present some challenges, just so from us as partners, only having 2 people to kind of then hold down the fort. We had a project anyway that needed some attention. And so that was also a role. And then that week, we ended up having 2 corruption issues with companies that we had not previously done work with. Having 2 corruption issues with companies that we had not previously done work with. So these were, and so that made for a very, very challenging schedule, right?
Yep. So Wednesday, the day of the conference, the first day of the conference, that was the day that I spent pretty much the entire day fixing corruption for a new client.
Right.
And it was one of those things that had we both been there and not had anyone left to cover things, we would have just had to say, sorry, we can't do that. We'll have to help you another time, which would not have been a good answer for that client.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So that's still something that we have to figure out, from our end. But that was played into the reason for only having one of us there. But I guess getting back to the objectives for a second, we felt like we were able to create that intimate environment and where people could participate, get to know one another. And I think there were 2 major reasons for that. It ended up sitting in kind of a horseshoe shape, right? So the kind of the traditional U. Attendees really liked this because when someone started speaking, even if that was a speaker, which at the beginning, it was mostly just speakers talking. So all the speakers were in there. Right? They, for the most part, knew each other, or at least knew of each other. And so there were some relationships already there. When people started speaking, you didn't have to turn around, right, to engage them. You were, a slight tilt of the head, you were looking at that person, and then you could engage from there. So people really, really liked that idea. And then the other was that the way we actually started the conference is that we started the conference with the 4 rules, and then we did the 3 questions. Right, so the 4 rules is setting some ground rules as to what you can expect out of the conference, and if you don't have those things, to speak up. And then the next portion is just introducing yourself and actually find who your people, some questions to go off of, and they're open ended to invite some discussion. and to start making some connections, right? So you can find who your people are. And I think the combination of those two things helped to increase that engagement. And so, so again, and then with the speakers being there and making the commitment to be there for the 2 days, we felt like we could make our objectives, and so that's ultimately why we went through with it. And so the other thing there that I think, so from an objectives perspective, is that the attendees were able to get to know each other, and we had great content, right? So from all of those things, we felt like the objectives got met. And I guess, we didn't feel like we were promising more than that, and that's what we were able to deliver. And it is interesting because I was a little bit nervous, and I had told we thought we'd have and even at 60 people, right? That's not a ton of people. I mean, that's not, when you think about other conferences, that's, very, very small in comparison. But we were going to be a smaller group. And at first they were kind of like, this is a little bit strange, or this is not what we thought we'd have a few more. But by the end, I actually had 2 people say, hey, this is right-sized. And we've actually backed, again, so from a future perspective, we're actually going to come back off of that 60 number. And it looks like maybe 30 is our new target. And again, the ability we want everyone to be able to sit in that horseshoe shape or be able to face each other, basically, with a desk. And that it kind of factors into, to that idea.
So you're not just a face in the crowd; you're actually there participating, and I think that's the difference.
And so then that was the other piece. So participating. So one of the ideas. So we had a mix, spiced that up a bit. Mix of traditional conference and unconference, right? So we had the speakers; they each had a dedicated session. That's what we had promoted on the website as well. That these are the things that they're going to talk about. But we spiced that up a bit, and we actually solicited input, and we said, hey, what is it that you guys want to talk about? Everybody wrote those down on index cards. We put them up on the wall, and then we actually had everyone vote, right, on what they wanted to talk about. And one of the things that made it up onto the list was SSIS. And so this was
interesting, because that wasn't even one of the things that we had anticipated that people would want to hear about, right?
Exactly. And so this was interesting for 2 reasons. So that it stemmed a discussion in 2 ways. One, the card just said SSIS. We started with some questions, and then we asked who wanted to talk about it. And one of the attendees, John, I think we mentioned in this podcast, John actually said, hey, I'd like to talk about that. So he and Doug actually led that discussion. And this was on day 2 in the afternoon. And because we had all that time together, everyone had gotten familiar with each other. And so we were able to have I don't want to call it impromptu. It wasn't as polished, if you will, as a traditional session, but it was very specific to what people wanted to talk about. Doug happened to have a VM. He pulled up his packages, and we were able to do some demonstration and actually talk through, well, here's what I do, here's what we do. And it was, there were conversations all over the place, and I learned some things just about logging that I didn't know about. And then that turned into a discussion on BIML and, and doing all of that, to which, Randolph was like, oh, I'm impressed, right? He hadn't really seen it. And he mentioned, I don't know that I would have spent as much time. It was only like a 30-minute discussion, right? But I don't know that I would have spent 30 minutes on BIML. But now that I've been exposed to it, we had in that context, I feel like that's something that I want to, learn a bit more about. And so,
interesting.
Yeah, it was, So I really liked that component of it, right? Is that it was a very organic conversation that we didn't have to worry about time necessarily, and we could kind of go with what people wanted to talk about.
Okay, so a lot of good outcomes there.
Yes.
As far as challenges, what were the biggest challenges?
Yeah, so challenges. I think in the beginning we didn't do a great job of getting user feedback. I know originally we kind of started with the idea of the lone DBA, which I'm not opposed to. I think we knew we were looking for a segment of people. We wanted people to easily identify with whether or not they would want to come to the conference. And we thought the lone DBA might be a good way to do that. Getting a hold of those people was a bit of a challenge. And then even you compañeros, right? We asked for feedback time and time again, and we got not as much as we would have liked. And now you could also say, well, the way that we went about it wasn't good. I mean, there were things to learn there. It felt like there was enough interest, but we didn't do a great job of connecting the dots and saying, hey, what is it that you guys really want to do and would be willing to pay for?
Yep. And I think part of that, I mean, early on, we were trying to get feedback there. And I think that we just didn't have the right venue for people to be able to present that feedback to us, I think.
No, yeah, exactly. That's right. A lot of that initial feedback was I was contacting people directly and asking them. And I was reaching out to managers. I was very concerned about. So I also think about this idea of getting approval, right? For people getting approval to come. And so I wanted to make sure that I could tear down from so when the manager looked at the website, that all their boxes would be checked and that they would, if the employee wanted to come, that they'd get approval. And so from that perspective, I think we did okay. I think maybe it was that last mile of, who should attend and why.
Yep.
So I also think, having it in October, so we knew that we were not Summit, right? And we're not Ignite, and we're not, that's not what we were putting on. Even if our capacity is 60 people, that we were not putting on that type of conference.
Right.
But I don't.
That's a very different type of conference than what we were going for.
Oh, yeah, exactly. However, having said that, I don't think that we fully realized the pull, at least from the people in our network, right? So the people who are listeners, I mean, those are people who were kind of we were reaching out to. And, so speakers, SQL Saturday people as well. I don't think that we had good data, right? We didn't have good data, or the data that we had was wrong, basically. We heard a lot of people saying, oh, I'm not going to Summit, right? It's over Halloween. And we thought, okay, well, hey, look, maybe this is the year to try it.
Right.
Even it's not the same. We're not saying it's the same, right? But let's try to do something different, right? Something that, and I think the pull of those bigger conferences was just too big, right? And a lot of people ended up either going to one of them, with Ignite being the week before and then Summit being a couple weeks later. The plans that they had in April and May changed, and people ended up going, or other things happened, right? So.
Right. And I think, that's a great sort of learning thing from being our first.
Exactly.
But I think now we've learned.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and the other thing there is just the standardization. I think people have gotten very, very comfortable with the way PASS does the events. And yeah, if you're in that world already, I think change is not, people seem resistant to change a little bit there.
Yep.
So, but I think one of the nice things is that we've had the event. We can now have people can respond to it, give feedback on it. You can see it. Jonathan wrote up a very, very nice post about it. The speakers have come; they've seen it as well, and so hopefully some of that will filter in, into the community. Yeah. So
the other challenge. Do we want to talk any about the financial side of it?
Oh yeah, so that's right. At the end of the day, it is, and happen to the standardization process, right? And I'll take a SQL Saturday. I haven't been involved with those and putting those on, particularly when it's a free event, right? So because of the standardization that PASS has done, right? So PASS is sponsoring, Microsoft is now sponsoring, and you have all these vendors that know it's kind of a known quantity, right? Because they've put all that time and energy into explaining what it is and having people go and whatnot. That from a sponsorship perspective, the entire event can run off of sponsorships, right? And a lot of volunteers and all those kinds of things.
Yep.
So because we were going with the single track model, we knew that sponsorship would be very, very difficult because there wasn't the traditional, hey, you get to have a booth, right? Talk to the attendees, raffle tickets, things like that. Let alone from the numbers perspective, right? Yes, again, that's that, hey, you get to have a booth, right? Talk to the attendees, raffle tickets, things like that. Let alone from the numbers perspective, right? And so that was a challenging idea as well. And so as a result, right, we depended entirely on revenue from the attendee tickets. It ended up being about $4,000. Our expenses were about $6,000. So and that was the other thing that I guess, again, that's that decision. I knew that when we made that decision to, for Steve not to come out and to move ahead with it, that we couldn't cheat the people who had come and basically budget it, right? Because I didn't want them to feel like they were getting short-ended, right? I wanted to make sure that we were meeting the commitments we'd made to them. But from a business perspective, so as an entrepreneur, you can't, doesn't equate to long-term success.
Now, if we were like a software development company and we had a whole bunch of products that were being sold out there,
right,
and we could write off that loss as a advertising expense, perhaps, or something, then yeah, we could keep doing that indefinitely. But I think that we really don't have that. I mean, other than our consulting business, we don't have that other revenue stream,
right? Or outside investment, right? Things like that, right?
Yep. So I think being able to set it up in a way that it works, so we don't lose money to do it,
right?
I think is a key factor to make this sustainable going into the future.
Yeah, so I guess we could talk about that future, and I feel like we were pretty close. I mean, it's not like we were at the Ritz-Carlton, right, and doing all kinds of real crazy over the top things. Although we went on the cruise, we had a nice buffet dinner that was very, very nice. Made sure we had plenty of food and the room was nice, and all these. I don't think very, very nice. Made sure we had plenty of food and the room was nice, and all these things. It wasn't over the top. I think if we had got from 8 to 16, we would have been in a better place, right? And so I guess talking about the future, right? So a couple of takeaways. I guess another challenge. I'll put this in a challenge. I knew it would be a slight challenge to use the word compañero. I don't think I understood how challenging that was going to be.
Well, and that's one of those things that in retrospective, it's easy to see that now.
Right.
And I think just looking back at our podcast episode 100 with Kevin slaughtering the name compañero, however he tried to say it at the beginning. I mean, maybe that should have been a clue, but we didn't. I mean, we kind of had fun with it. And but yeah, I think that's a good point. It's a tough one to say or even to spell for a lot of people.
That's right, for a lot of people. Conference idea, I'd like to stay away from that word conference. And so some of the feedback that we got and some of the thoughts that we have about potentially putting on, if we were to do an event in 2018, right? Some of the things that we thought about. So one, renaming it to Sequel Trail. Sequel Trail, much easier. It's kind of already part of our brand as well, right? We'll see you on the Sequel Trail. We've said that every episode since episode 0 that has been part of the podcast. And so I feel like incorporating that would be a bit easier.
Oh, yeah. And I'd be curious to hear what people think about that. I mean, does Sequel Trail make more sense than Companero Conference?
Right.
And we're always looking for feedback on those kind of things.
That's right. And the reason I like it is, so again, kind of using from, even Sequel Cruise or, Sequel Saturday, they're not using that word conference. They have that short name that can be used to, and then can be used to, to identify what it is, and without using the word conference. And so that's what I'd like to do. And so, Sequel Trail seemed like that, would be a potential, right? Potential name.
Yep. I like it.
The other change that we were looking forward to going forward is, so we had the event for 2 days. What we did is we used, it only ended up being about an hour, right? But we did an hour of introduction and then also maybe an hour and a half. So in that hour and a half, we did the introduction and then the session selections for the Thursday. Part of the feedback is, hey, let's push that to either before the conference basically, and or separate it from the first day of the quote unquote conference. And so what we're thinking of doing is making that 2.5 days. So we'll start, for example, on a Wednesday at 2 p.m. You have the welcome. Everybody comes, introduces them, introducing that idea of the social into the start of the conference, and then choosing sessions that afternoon, and then having a dinner, right? So then at the end of the day on Wednesday, you know the session, so you know the schedule for Thursday and Friday.
Right.
Right. And then on Thursday and Friday, you come and it's more, I won't say traditional, but from a schedule perspective, you kind of at least know what to expect at that point. And then if people are traveling or whatnot, again, they can come in the morning, but if for whatever reason they're a little bit late, that component of it is taken care of. And then the other thing that people really that everybody talked about was they'd like more hands-on. And we did talk about a hands-on. And so if while nobody criticized it, I guess I could see that being one thing that we kind of tweaked a little bit from our original session. And the hands-on, the lab idea sounds really nice, but it is a
Software install.
lot of work. And it is super hard to pull off well, right? Because, you've been in a lab, right? Some people breeze through it. Others have no idea, somewhere in the middle. How do you work with all of that?
And do people bring their own computers, or do we supply computers?
Yeah, exactly. And again, if we're supplying computers and all of a sudden, again, that gets, much more expensive and logistics and things.
Yep. And if everybody brings their own, then we've got to figure out how to get the right software installed.
Yeah, exactly. Or, are we installing software, things like that. So there are all those kinds of questions. So one of the thoughts that we have, and we're looking for the right people, but that might be a way to partner with our sponsors and to have a couple of things that we say, okay, in the conference, you're going to be able to come away with, and let's just take as an example, you're going to be able to build an availability group, create a container in SQL Server, create an SSIS package, and use some DMVs or do some database monitoring.
Yep.
Right. You're going to get hands-on in those 4 areas. And then have the sponsors come in and help support those things. And again, just to use an example, because I'm talking to them, like the folks at Windocs, right? Having them come out, they can help with the lab and setting up the how-to. This is how I set up my container in SQL Server. They'll make that commitment, but then they'll also be able to then say, okay, that you've seen how that's happened, right? Now here's how we can help make your life easier.
Yep.
Right.
And I think that would be incredibly valuable, because so often when you're at a conference and you meet with a sponsor or a vendor and you talk to them and you think, wow, your product or your stuff seems really cool. But then you get home and you realize, oh, how do I try that out? Or where do I go now that I want to try it out? And you realize, oh, there's no trial to download, or I got a demo with a couple different, more than just here's a lecture from a vendor. It'd be like, here's how we actually make it work hands-on. Right. That would be awesome.
Right. But in conjunction also with, okay, here's how you could do A, right? Like SSIS, right? Let's build an SSIS package. Here's some basic things. Okay, now how could you make that easier, right? And those conversations, again, and if the sponsors are willing to commit to come to the conference and spend the time to make those relationships, then I think it will be easier to have those conversations when it comes for lab time towards the end of the conference. So
we should be thinking about what sponsors would be interested in doing that.
That's right. And so, compañeros, if you have ideas, let us know. And so this kind of gets us to the question of, should we try this again in 2018? I can say that I had a blast, right? I enjoyed it. I enjoyed getting to know Aaron and Gretchen and Bryce and Jen and Bryce and Jeff and all of a sudden his name is escaping my mind, Dave. Yeah. Good thing we gave him a Companero shout out the other day.
Yes.
Yeah. And getting to know those guys and of course the speakers in a different way. But ultimately, I think we want to see if this has some staying power, right? Are people going to, or is this something of interest? And we'd like to hear from you. I think you can do that in a couple of ways, right? Obviously, social media is one. The other is we'll make available, so on the website, on the show notes page, we'll put in a little section. I don't know if it's a poll, if is the right word, but we'll give you the ability to sign up to put your email address in and say, yes, I'm interested in being part of the conversation about the 2018 conference.
Yep. And with that, we will not list. We will just use that for discussion of where we're going to go, what we want to do, those kind of things.
That's right. And many of you have trusted us with your email address, and we hope that, you're not seeing that as, that we're providing good content. And of course, obviously there's a subscribe button there and everything, if, should you not want to. But I think if we can get to, and I'm not sure what the right number is, but I think if we can get a certain number of people to sign up to say, yes, I'm interested in, in providing feedback at a minimum, and would be interested in being contacted or being informed about when and if we do this in 2018. If we get a certain number, then I think that will be one of the criteria that we'll use to determine if we should go forward.
Yep, I like it.
Yeah. So I think that's the retrospective. I think we learned lots. I think I'm glad that we went through it, and thanks obviously to those who attended and to the speakers. I guess I should say in that number. So we talked about those numbers, those expenses. Only thing I provided to the speakers was the ability to attend. Obviously, their food and the cruise was provided for, and a T-shirt and a notebook. Right? I didn't help. I mean, we had, Randolph came in from Canada. There's all those flights, hotels, all of it was on their own. And so we can't say enough thank you to them. If we had those additional costs, obviously, it just wouldn't have happened.
Yep. So what are we doing next?
Yes. So I guess with that, and we're testing out this idea of the sequel trail. We mentioned this event that we need to talk about at the end. And so Steve and I thought, okay, well, again, kind of in that idea of engaging with you companeros and continuing the conversation, we are putting together an event at Summit. So this would be included in that on Wednesday evening. So we're actually gonna bundle it up. It's gonna start in the middle of the last session of the day on Wednesday, and then it will go to 7 p.m. We'll put out the details. But this idea of sequel trail, I was thinking about, so sequel trail, and should that be something that we kind of call our events, right? And this would be included in that. We're going to provide some food, right? So it will be at which all of a sudden I can't remember the name, but we'll provide appetizers and things, and we'll have raffles for drinks and whatnot, which we'll explain later. But I was thinking, you know what? So sequel trail. And then I was thinking about food, and my wife actually said, you should call it Trail Mix.
So it's the Trail Mix event.
There you go. That's right. It's the sequel Trail Mix event. So that's what we're going to call it. We hope you'll come.
And how can people find out more about it?
So it will be on the show notes. If you're on our mailing list, we're going to raffle up our mailing list. You'll get an announcement about that. And then through social media, we'll be publicizing that, as it comes around. We'll invite you to sign up for Eventbrite just so that we know approximately how many to expect, and again, all the other details will be there as well.
But even though it's through Eventbrite, there's no admission fee or anything like that. It's just trying to get people to RSVP that way.
Yeah, exactly. Just so that we know, and ultimately to help us with the raffle, for example. So we're going to raffle up some of the Sequel Companero shirts and the notebooks and things, and so that would just be easy. That way we have your name. We'll pre-print them, and then we can just pull it out of a hat and go from there.
Awesome.
So, okay. Well, I guess that's going to do it for today's episode. If you have other questions, obviously reach out to us. We'd love to continue to talk with you. Our music for SQL Server in the News is by Mansardi, used under Creative Commons. You can always reach out to us on social media or connect with us on LinkedIn.
And we'll see you on the SQL Trail, or at Past Summit at the SQL Trail Mix.
SQL Data Partners.